All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Myself, should I work so hard? Sit and dream about the days to come. Half a dress just soaking up the sun. Sitting here, I hope I don't get fried. 2 years ago, you know, I almost died. And yet there's nothing better for your soul.
And welcome back to the X Zone, hour number 2 of tonight's show. My name is Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network and your hometown radio, Classic 1220, streaming worldwide at classic1220.ca. X Zone Nation, my guest this hour is Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Kevin Randle, retired. We're going to be talking about UFOs, and you know, because a lot of people listening now have just joined us, whether they're listening to us online or on one of the many affiliates we're on, including our new affiliate, WVEX 105.3 FM in Midland, Michigan, who really do not know the beginning of ufology. A lot of people, sure, they've seen Fire in the Sky. They know about Travis Walton. They've watched the congressional hearings, and they know David Grush and the other people who are there. They've heard of Steve Bassett and with the work he's doing. But where did it all start? So the modern era, that is, the modern era, where did the modern era of ufology start? So what I thought I would do this hour is bring my good friend Kevin Randle on. He's a great author. He is a real former member of the military, an intelligence officer, investigator of Roswell and many other UFO crash sites, including Levelland, to come on the show and basically take us through the beginning of modern day ufology to get as far as we can in this hour. So joining me is my friend, the one and only Kevin Randle. Kevin, welcome back to the show, and as I always say, with much respect, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. And I'd like to say it's been a long time since I've been on your show.
It has been, and it seems like only earlier today I was talking to you producing your show.
Yeah, it just seems that way.
Yeah. Kevin, you and I were talking before the show, and yes, I did produce your show earlier today. I thoroughly enjoy producing a different perspective, which, by the way, Exonation, you can go to xzbn.net and scroll down, and you'll see a different perspective with Kevin Randle, and all Kevin's shows are there. You can listen to them anytime with our complete compliments. And Kevin has a weekly show here, and it's called A Different Perspective. There you go. See, I did a nice plug for you.
Yes, you did. I appreciate that.
I know you do, and I appreciate everything you do, Kev. So Kevin and I were talking about ufology, or we can't call it ufology anymore, can we? What do we call it? Uapoly?
No, we'll call it ufology and ignore the nonsense of trying to change the acronym.
All right, I agree with that. So, Kevin, when, in your opinion, and based on your expertise, when did the modern UFO era begin?
A lot of people peg it with the Kenneth Arnold sighting in June of 1947. I think, and there's a growing consensus, that it actually began in the late stages of the Second World War with the Foo Fighters. These were mostly glowing balls of gas that were spotted by all the airmen fighting in the war, whether they were American or British or German or Japanese. It was some kind of phenomenon that seemed to haunt the formations and the like. Some of them actually reported disc-shaped objects. Some of them fired at the balls of what they thought of as gas, and the tracers would go into the ball of gas and not come out, suggesting there was some kind of solid object in there. There was a investigation conducted at the highest levels of the Allied command in Great Britain to determine what they were, afraid that they were a German secret weapon. And when the war ended, of course, the priority disappeared. Nobody cared anymore. And in the investigation of the German records found out that they were having similar problems, and they were concerned it was an Allied secret weapon. So the modern era kind of begins at that point. And then a year after the war ended, 1946, there were the ghost rocket sightings in Sweden that caused a great deal of concern, actually in Scandinavia and Northern Europe, and it spread throughout Europe. Again, no solution was found. There was a belief at one point that they might be some kind of Soviet contraption to intimidate the Scandinavian military and the other countries in Scandinavia. And then on June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold saw what he described as 9 objects flying formation near Mount Rainier in Washington, and had a motion like saucers skipping across a pond. So that's where the term flying saucer was invented at the time. That got publicity, and then we began to get other reports of UFOs, flying saucers, that predated Arnold's, but nobody had known who to report it to and didn't know what it was. I skipped over one important point. There was an investigator involved with the Foo Fighters, Colonel Howard McCoy. He was also involved with investigating the ghost rockets in Sweden. And in late 1946, the head of the Air Materiel Command, General Nathan Twining, suggested he set up an unofficial investigation to these things, because there were getting reports in the United States of something going on there, but it was through official channels and it wasn't the widespread things that happened then. So there was a kind of an unofficial investigation that began in 1946. Once Arnold made his sighting, and once all the other reports started coming in, and there was the newspaper articles going on, it morphed into a more official investigation, finally becoming Project Sign, which was the first of the Air Force investigations of UFOs or flying saucers. But just 2 weeks after Arnold's sighting, which did garner a great deal of national publicity, there was the event in Roswell. There had been discussion in the newspapers for the 2 weeks. What are these flying discs, these flying saucers? There were all kinds of explanations, some kind of Soviet project, some kind of new natural phenomena, some talking about being interplanetary as opposed to interstellar craft, that sort of thing. And then we had the Roswell case where they said that one of the flying saucers had been captured on a ranch in the Roswell region. 3 hours later, the next higher headquarters in Fort Worth said, no, it was just a weather balloon. News media couldn't find the man who found it, couldn't find the intelligence officer in Roswell, Jesse Marcel. Marcel was in Fort Worth, hiding from the press. Brazel was in the custody of the military in Roswell. They couldn't find any other information. So that story kind of died out, and it became considered a hoax in early UFO history. But at that same time, there was an awful lot of sightings going on all over the country and literally all over the world. So the modern era, you can say it began with the Foo Fighters, or you can say it began with the Arnold sighting in 1947. That's kind of a brief history of how we get to that point.
Kevin, why was Brazel in military custody?
He had reported that he had found this field of debris on his ranch. He didn't know where it came from. It was, according to the descriptions we have from various witnesses, it was about 3/4 of a mile long and 200 or 300 yards wide, but it was densely packed metallic debris. In fact, Brazel was complaining that A, he didn't know who was going to clean up the mess, and B, he was annoyed because he had to drive the livestock around it because they would not cross that field. So he went to Roswell to talk about what he had seen. He went to the sheriff's office. The sheriff called Jesse Marcel out at the base, the Roswell Army Airfield. Marcel called Colonel Blanchard, who was the commander. Blanchard said, go talk to him. He went to talk to the sheriff, George Wilcox, and saw some of the debris in Wilcox's office, which is an important point in the whole story. Couldn't identify what it was, and Blanchard suggested he get with the counterintelligence guy who had just been assigned to the base, Sheridan Cabot, and they followed Brazel out to the ranch and picked up some of the debris. So all of this kind of transpired from this alleged crash of something in Roswell, New Mexico, actually northwest of Roswell, New Mexico, in July of 1947.
Now, you and Don Schmitt and who else is there?
Tom Carey.
Tom Carey have done extensive work on the Roswell case. You've written many books. You've talked to a lot of people. Based on your investigation, what do you think, or what do you know, happened at the Roswell, New Mexico site?
Everybody agrees something fell. No argument about that. The question is, what was it? In my investigations, and I know Don and Tom both agree with this, there is no terrestrial explanation for it. Every terrestrial explanation we have tried to track down has failed. We were at White Sands Missile Range talking about the missile launches there and seeing if that could have accounted for the debris. Well, there are no launches in the time frame that would account for that. We looked for aircraft accidents. We looked for problems with atomic weapons. And I say that because in July of 1947, the 509th Bomb Group at Roswell was the only atomic strike force in the world. They had what was called the silver plate B-29s, and these were B-29s that had been modified to carry the atomic weapons. And they had mock-ups that they sometimes carried to practice with, loading the weapons and that sort of thing. And we thought that, well, maybe that would account for it, because had they inadvertently dropped one, of course it was inert, it wouldn't have gone off, but the size and shape of the weapon was actually classified at the time. But we are now you can go onto the internet and look up, I think it's a Mark K3 atomic bomb, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about there. We thought in 1995, when the Air Force investigated the Roswell claim, they came up with nothing that we didn't know about. We thought, here's an opportunity to present that thing that happened. It would, more than 50 years later, there would be no classification for it. It would be no reason not to reveal it. It wouldn't be that secret anymore. And they came up with what they called a Project Mogul balloon, and everybody talks about how highly classified that was. The experiments being conducted in Alamogordo with these arrays of balloons were not classified. It was off-the-shelf weather balloons, off-the-shelf radar targets, and that sort of thing. The problem was it was a long array of, when they got to New Mexico, 400 feet. They'll talk about 600 feet, but that was back on the East Coast. They modified it when they got to New Mexico.
Kevin?
The only culprit there was flight number 4, and it was canceled.
All right, Kevin,
So
please
we have
stand.
no documentation.
Please stand by, Kevin. Exonation, if you'd like to find out more about Kevin Randle, the great books he's written, as well as his very interesting and complete blog spot, kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and we'll both be back on the other side of this break. And we're right here. Classic 1220, streaming classic1220.ca.
Rock and roll, sunny days.
I would have given you all of my heart, but there's someone who's torn it apart, and she's taken almost all that I've got. But if you want, I'll try to love again. Baby, I'll try to love again, but I know the first cut is the deepest.
And welcome back. Kevin Randle is our special guest. His blogspot is kevinrandle.com. kevinrandle.blogspot.com. There we go. I got it right at the second time. And Kevin does a show on the X Zone Broadcast Network, and it's called A Different Perspective. It's done every week, and you can listen to the show on Kevin's website, or if you'd like to listen to it at a later date and time, just go to xzbn.net, look for Kevin Randle, A Different Perspective, click on it, and all of his shows appear there just as if it's magic. How the hell do they do that? By the way, Kevin, you have to share with the listeners how Bud Aldrin, introduces himself.
Well, yeah, this is what I've heard. Now, I'm not sure it's the truth, but when you meet Buzz Aldrin, he says, "Hi, I'm Buzz Aldrin. I walked on the moon. Kneel before me."
All right, explain that just in case there's young people there and they're saying, huh?
Neil Armstrong was the first man to walk on the moon. So Buzz Aldrin was the second one. He followed Neil. Kneel before me.
See, it's not dirty. It's factual.
Yeah, that's what makes it funny.
Yeah. Okay, we were talking about Roswell. We were talking about Project Mogul. And it doesn't wash with you guys.
As I said, one of the things the Air Force did, and we have to thank Colonel Weaver for this, he had gotten the diary and the field notes of Dr. Albert Crary, who was the man in charge of the New York University balloon project in Alamogordo at the time. And in that notes is a listing of all the launches. And one of the launches has no data with it, and people were saying, well, it had to be flight number 4 because that was the one that didn't go as far as it should have, or something was wrong with it. But it turns out it was canceled, and it says in the footnotes, or in the field notes, it was canceled because of clouds. They could not fly these long arrays in the dark or in cloudy weather or whatever, simply because it was a hazard to aerial navigation. Now we get to today's world, and Charles Moore, who was one of the people working on this project in Alamogordo at the time, had been saying, well, we launched it at 2:30 in the morning. So we wonder, well, if you launched it at 2:30, how can you cancel it at dawn?
Exactly.
That sort of thing. So the point simply is everywhere we looked, and we looked at a lot of stuff in a lot of different organizations trying to find something that would account for the terrestrial debris, make it a terrestrial incident. In fact, when Don and I first went to Roswell, we assumed we were going to find an explanation. And then we talked to Bill Brazel, the son of the man who found it, and he turned our attitude around by his descriptions of what he had seen and what he had done. And I said to Don as we were returning home, we've got to come back. And the investigation expanded from there. We could find no terrestrial explanation. For me, that's not enough to leap right to the extraterrestrial, but it suggests that. I would like something more of a smoking gun, photographs of it, pieces of debris that clearly have to have came from an off-world civilization, something like that. Right now is just kind of an illogical leap. Well, there's no terrestrial explanation we can find. The Air Force had motivation to present that terrestrial explanation back in 1995, 1996, and they didn't do so. Ergo, they didn't have one either. Doesn't mean that something won't appear in the future that says, oh yeah, that explains it. To this point, we don't have that explanation, and so I lean toward the extraterrestrial. Not as strongly as I did when we got first involved in the investigation, because some of the witnesses we talked to have turned out to be less than candid. And that, I think that's hurt the investigation, but there's a long list of firsthand witnesses who were involved in some capacity. For example, Edwin Easley, who was the provost marshal at Roswell in 1947, provost marshal being like the chief of police. The man in charge of security on the base and security, the MP company that patrolled the streets of Roswell to keep the soldiers in line, that sort of thing. So he was high up there, and I talked to him about it. And he told me in a conversation, which I did not record because of the circumstances, and I regretted that ever since. I asked him, are we on the right path? Meaning Don and I think it's extraterrestrial. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, what do you mean? I said, well, we think it's extraterrestrial. He said, well, let me put it this way. It's not the wrong path. So now we've got a very credible man who was there in Roswell in 1947. We can document that completely, telling me that it was the path we were following toward the extraterrestrial was not the wrong path. He said other things that I do have on tape. He said repeatedly that he couldn't really talk about it because he was sworn to secrecy. And he said at one point to us, I promised the president I wouldn't talk about it. And of course, the skeptical comments were, well, do you think the president would be talking to a major? And I'm thinking, I remember the president talking to a lieutenant colonel named Doolittle about the raid into Japan in 1942. So yeah, the president would talk to somebody who had specific information, but it really doesn't matter because the president's representative could have said that to him. The president would like you not to talk about it in secret. We just found not that long ago a letter from the Secret Service station in Denver to Easley, thanking him for his help during the year of 1947, which is, again, not the smoking gun, but it leads us in that direction. So we've got that kind of evidence. So as I say, I lean toward the extraterrestrial, but I would like something that was a little more concrete.
What about the alien autopsy movie that came out with from what was his name? Ray Santilli.
Ray Santilli,
Yeah.
yes. That's a hoax. And the thing that I do not understand and will never understand, when it first came out, they talked about there being 2.5 hours of film.
Mm-hmm.
The film included the removal of the craft from the desert, Truman on site, and the autopsies going on. When we finally saw the film, that was not anywhere near that. It was in a hospital setting. There had been a setting, supposedly some kind of preliminary autopsy done in the field in a tent, and the footage was too dark for them to use, but they had the hospital footage. Eventually, Ray Santilli admitted, or somebody admitted, that the tent footage that had found its way into the hands of some of the news media, again, was not broadcast quality, had been faked by Ray Santilli and his people because they were trying to I guess, dramatize what was going on and make footage that was clearer. Later on, it came out that the hospital footage, which was very bright and easy to see, violated almost every military protocol for these kinds of autopsies. When I say these kinds, I mean of humans, not necessarily aliens. Violated all the rules of that. When he said it came out that parts of that had been faked as well, but they had put some frames of the real film into that alien autopsy, and I'm thinking, geez, what a wonderful way to discredit the whole thing.
Right, exactly.
He said, Santilli said that they had the cameraman, and he wasn't going to give us his name, but he was the one that filmed the autopsy. And I'm thinking, well, you've just told us who it is, because, you know, the military is going to have records of all that because this was supposedly highly classified. So they'll know who was the photographers involved in filming this stuff. And Santilli also said I think he paid $100,000 for the film. And so now the IRS is going to be breathing down the guy's neck as well. It all collapsed there. And as I say, Santilli admitted that much of the hospital footage was fake, and I think it's all fake. But there are still people who argue endlessly that the alien autopsy is real, but it's not. It's put together. We've got photographs of them creating the aliens. In fact, some of the people involved in the creation of it, Philip Mantle, who runs the Flying Disc Press, was investigating it, and he obtained pictures from the people who created it in the story of the autopsy. So, and I think that some of the pictures of them creating the aliens are on my blog. But even in the face of that, there are people who insist the alien autopsy is real, but it's not.
Why do they still insist if there's enough proof, enough photographic proof? You know, you've
I
got
have no
testimony.
clue why. I don't understand that, Olive. There were witnesses that Don and I and Tom interviewed in the Roswell case. And when we learned that those witnesses were less than credible, we were the ones that told everybody. We didn't insist, oh no, it's a CIA plot to discredit them. They're really good witnesses. I mean, we had documentation showing that one of them, Frank Kaufman, who claimed to be a master sergeant, I think at one time he actually said he was a colonel, but a master sergeant trained in intelligence, and we got his records from the National Archives that showed he was a mid-level NCO trained in administration. Nothing to suggest any kind of training in intelligence. And I know from my own military career, while you move into intelligence work, some of the things you do might be classified. The training is not. Note on your record the military schools you'd gone to become whatever intelligence NCO or officer that you could be. I know that one of the things when I went in the National Guard right after 9/11, The battalion commander came to me one day and said, "Why are all your records at the NSA?" And I said, "I have no clue. And the only thing I could think of is the records of everybody who was in intelligence in some fashion." And my job in intelligence wasn't all that special, but anybody who was in intelligence, the records were kept sacred from the standard area. They used to publish something called the Army Registry or the Air Force Registry, depending on what branch of service. And it lists all of the officers on active duty. And I've come across a number of officers who I know were in the Air Force, but their names aren't listed in that, and it's because they were all involved with intelligence. Once they left the intelligence field, their names began to appear in the registry. So that's how I know they were officers. So you have to look at all of that kind of stuff to get an idea of that. But I do not understand why, when you're presented with the evidence, you refuse to accept it. You think it's some kind of government hoax. And the government has done that, but we look to make sure that we're following the right ways to get that information and vet that information to ensure that it's not some kind of trick to lead us in the other direction. But the evidence is just overwhelming that the alien autopsy is a hoax.
Kevin, stand by. You and I have to take our break at the bottom of the hour. And Exo Nation, if you'd like to find out more about Kevin Randle, if you'd like to find some of the books that he has, and I know in one of the promos we do, Kevin, it's 25 books. How many books is it now?
Well, UFO books is 37. And in the, I gave up counting at 125.
All right, stand by, my friend. Anyway, go to kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and he's there all over the place. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue from our broadcast center in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, streaming at classic1220.ca.
I would have given you all of
Sun goes down on a silky day, quarter moon walking through the Milky Way. Oh, you and me, baby, we could think of something to do. It's the right time of the night. The stars are winking above. It's the right time of the night for making love.
And welcome back, everyone. Kevin Randle is my special guest this hour, kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And Kevin, you know, with all the ufology investigators that are out there, 99.9% of them are actually armchair investigators, or they have no investigation skill whatsoever. When you, Tom, and Don would go out and actually do the investigations, what do those armchair investigators say when they think that they've actually found something on the internet that you guys missed? How do you react to that?
By asking them what it is and then checking it out ourselves. I think that the one thing you miss by not talking to people in person and you just go through the internet, you have to figure out what is right and what is wrong, because there's so much stuff out there, and everybody apparently with a keyboard has an opinion on this stuff, and a lot of times it's just their gut feelings as opposed to any investigative skill. I remember saying to people that Sheridan Cabot was the last one I wanted to investigate, to interview, and avoided doing that. And they would say, why? And I said, because I want to be in the room with him. I want to watch his body language.
Right.
I want to see how he reacts. Cabot being the counterintelligence officer that went out with Jesse Marcel to the debris field. And we finally caught up with him in Sierra Vista, Arizona, where they were wintering. He lived in Sequim, Washington. And Sierra Vista is right outside the gates of Fort Huachuca, which is the Army's big intelligence center, for those of you interested in that sort of thing. And we were interviewing him, and Don was talking to Cabot's wife, Mary. I was talking to Cabot, and the fact we'd separated him that way was annoying Cabot, because he didn't know what she might say. And I remember asking him about the bodies, and here's why I wanted to be in the room. I asked him about the bodies, and he looked at me. He leaned forward, picked up a magazine off the coffee table, sat back, and threw the magazine back on the coffee table and said, "Did Bill Rickett tell you that?" And so by his reaction, I know I had hit a nerve on that. To protect Rickett, I said, "No, I got it from Edwin Easley," and he relaxed immediately, so I knew I blew the questioning. But later on, he and Rickett started communicating with one another. Rickett was the NCOIC, the top NCO and the counterintelligence officer at Roswell. And there was some talk there that suggests that they had gone out together to see the crashed craft. In fact, Rickett had told us that. Rickett never mentioned anything about bodies. Rickett talked about the debris and that sort of thing. Cavett, of course, changed his tune repeatedly, told us, Don and me, that he hadn't been there. He was too busy to do any kind of chasing weather balloons type things, with getting security clearances for the people at the base and that sort of thing. He said he wasn't even in Roswell at the right time frame. He didn't get there until later, a couple of weeks later. Eventually, when we got additional documentation, he admitted finally that he was there. He had been there. And he told Colonel Weaver that he'd gone out with Brazel. He wasn't sure that Marcel was with him, but he went out there with Brazel. And I remember, again, talking to him. Now we were in Sequim, Washington, interviewing him. And I said to him, well, Marcel describes this guy from West Texas who could ride horses, was a thin man, under 6 feet tall. And Kevin says, well, that pretty well describes me, doesn't it? Later on, when Weaver interviewed him, or actually Weaver interviewed him before that, he admitted that he was there and he'd gone out with Brazel, but there was nothing to it. It was just a weather balloon. So Cavett kind of cut his own throat with his testimony there. But I guess the point is you can do stuff on the phone. You can interview people over the phone. And a lot of these armchair investigators don't even do that. When we were doing it, there were long distance charges, and we were running up huge phone bills talking to people on the phone. Today, you can get on the internet and talk to anybody practically in North America without any kind of charges to other.
Kevin, are you still there? Oh, looks like we lost Kevin. Oh, wait a sec. We're reconnecting with Kevin. Okay. Craig, how are we doing?
Say again?
Yeah, there we go. We lost you for a second there, buddy. You were talking about the internet and now how with, things like Skype or Ring Central, you can actually call anywhere in the world for next to nothing.
Well, we could conduct an investigation today without running up these huge phone bills. But the point is, you may get a clue from what they're saying on the phone by the tone of their voice or the way they react. But it's best to be in the room so you can watch the body language. You can see how they react to the questions. And so we tried to do that as much as we could, talk to the people in person and get a feel for whether they were telling us the truth or not. And granted, we blew it a couple of times, but there were times where it was very obvious that the person was very upset by what he or she was telling us, or the person was clearly not being as honest as we would like them to be.
Kevin, at the time of Roswell's crash, were there any other crashes or any other mass sightings around the world that could show some sort of correlation with what happened at Roswell?
Well, the interesting thing is, Kenneth Arnold, when he described the UFOs, the flying saucers first, they were sort of heel-shaped. He's now had a stylized drawing with it. It's very crescent-shaped with a scallop-type trailing edge. On July 7th, 1947, a guy in Phoenix, Arizona, named William Rhodes, took 2 photographs of an object, which had the same shape. So there's been discussion about what Arnold had seen, but here's Rhodes with photographs. Now, Arnold got involved in an investigation of a UFO sighting at the behest of a magazine publisher in Chicago, and he realized he was over his head. He had been in contact with 2 Army Air Force intelligence officers, Brown and well, I don't remember the guy's name for some reason at the moment, but when Davidson. when he realized he was in head, he called those guys and they came up to help him with the investigations, and they were discussing it. I think it was Brown was discussing it with Arnold, and Arnold asked basically that same question, and he said, "Yeah, we have a photograph from I don't know if he said Phoenix or not, but we have a photograph that looks like what you saw." So there was that kind of discussion, but at the same time, there were lots and lots of sightings now being reported for two reasons that I can think of. Is one, when people saw something, they knew to call the newspapers and they knew to call the military, and that inspired others to report their sightings as well. So they knew where to report their sightings, and there was an awful lot of activity. One of the news headlines that is important for this is from Kansas, and it said, UFO or flying saucers flying discs seen in 38 states except Kansas. The joke was that Kansas was a dry state at the time, which meant there was no alcoholic beverages being sold there, implying that the sober Kansans weren't seeing flying saucers, but the rest of the drunk country was. And that is where they kind of dropped the ridicule curtain on it. You don't believe in those flying saucers, do you? Which kind of began to inhibit people talking about their sightings.
When we talk about UFO sightings, you've talked much on your show about Socorro. You talk about Levelland, and one of the most interesting sighting cases that I think is, still hasn't been, explained, would be the Phoenix Lights, because as I understand it, there were two Phoenix Lights.
Well, I think it's calling it a Phoenix Light is somewhat of a misnomer. Yeah, there were Phoenix Lights, but there was also sightings of a large triangular-shaped object that wasn't lit up, and it apparently was reported from as far north as Henderson, Nevada, and as far south as Tucson, Arizona, and it reported by a great number of people. And that's kind of separate from the Phoenix Lights, but it was the same time. The actual same time as the Phoenix Lights. The Phoenix Lights, I'm pretty sure most of that was flares dropped on a gunnery range outside of Phoenix. And there's one series of the lights where you can see them kind of drifting down, and they go out 1, 2, 3. Mm-hmm. And if you put up I think it's the Estrella Mountains in Phoenix, you put that up and then you watch the lights and they're falling behind the mountains is what's going on there. There was a guy in Phoenix, and I don't remember his name, who put his telescope on it and saw that there were some aircraft doing some of that stuff. So you've got the Phoenix Lights, which I suppose I'm going to annoy all the people in Phoenix, Arizona now, which are pretty much explained, but we have that triangular-shaped object, and I've talked to a couple people who have reported that as well, and it's not really quite the same thing. So they were kind of concurrent.
Is it possible?
It's an interesting series of sightings, certainly.
Is it possible that the lights over Phoenix were to draw the attention away of whatever was happening with the second sighting?
I don't think so. I don't think they could have coordinated that quickly. The sightings, the lights, the flares being dropped in Phoenix were actually, I think it was Maryland National Guard unit that was out there doing training for their annual tour. And so they were housed at the active duty base, and they were on active duty for training. They weren't really part of the cadre there at the bases around Phoenix. And so it took them a while to figure out who had been dropping the flares. Because the first thing that the official spokesman for the Air Force said, we didn't have anybody up flying dropping flares, because their mission, the Maryland National Guard mission, had not been coordinated through the Public Affairs Office there in Phoenix. Later on, they came out with the flares answer. And I am fairly certain that's the correct answer for the lights, but I don't have a good answer for the triangular-shaped object.
Kevin, we've got about a minute before I go to commercial, so this is my question. It seems as if UFO sightings have suddenly gone way down. Am I correct or am I wrong?
I hear that they've gone up, but you don't hear a lot about it in the news because they're busy chasing all the congressional investigations and the current crop of UFO witnesses who come forward talking about UFO crashes in the past. And so the regular sightings type things have dried up. But if you take a look at the North American National UFO Reporting Center, they still have literally hundreds of sightings reported to them monthly.
All right, stand by, Kevin. We've got to take our final break, and this will be the last segment of tonight's show. My guest is Kevin Randle. His website is kevinrandle.blogspot.com, and Kevin's radio show, A Different Perspective, can be listened to in every one of its episodes entirety at www.xzbn.net. And in fact, you're listening to the X-Zone radio show right here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, and we're coming to you on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streaming classic1220.ca.
And he looks at her and says, hey, darling, I can remember when you could stop a cloud. Drop your silver in my tambourine. Help a poor man build a pretty dream. Give me pennies, I'll take anything. Now listen while I play my green tambourine. Watch the jingle jangle start to shine. Reflections of the music that is mine.
Welcome back, everyone. Before we get back to my guest this hour, Kevin Randle, I'd just like to say that there was an excellent article today in the St. Catharines Standard that was done by a good friend of mine, John Law, who is a reporter, and I've had the pleasure of knowing John ever since the X-Zone X-Chronicle started over 35 years ago. Another gentleman that I've had the pleasure of working with for a number of years, Tim Dennis, was the morning man at 610 CKTB here in St. Catharines, and Tim officially retired, and he was given the key to the city by Mayor Sisko. And Tim, it was a great pleasure knowing Tim. He was a very fine gentleman. He was always willing to help anybody at work. He was loved by the community, and he loved the community that he served. And Tim, wherever you are, I hope you enjoy yourself. And from everyone here at the X-Zone Nation, Timmy, you're a great guy, and I'll always have fond memories of you. My guest this hour is the one and only Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Kevin Randle. His website is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. First of all, Kevin, as always, thanks very much for coming on the show. Great speaking to you. And it's great working with you when I have the opportunity of working with you on your show. You get some of the most interesting people on your show. What was the name of the gentleman who is in charge of that? The Steve Marler?
Oh, David Marler.
David Marler. And of course, you had Tim and Don on your show a number of times, and Bud Hopkins' ex-wife, right? She was on there as well.
Yes. She's passed away. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I didn't. And of course, Travis Wall. Was Travis on your show, or is it just Mike Rogers?
Just Mike Rogers. I invited Travis on in person.
Right.
When I met him in Roswell, and he said sure. But when I tried to set it up, he had read some of my articles about abduction and decided it wasn't be worth the effort. I thought we would have an interesting discussion, but he just wouldn't do it. Then he and Mike Rogers got into some kind of scuffle over something, and I sent an email to Travis Walton about it, asked a couple of questions about it, and said that I wasn't interested in really getting deeply into that. That was their problem, not mine.
Right.
And he sent me a very cordial email back, but he still won't come on the program. I'll probably see him in the near future, and I'll see if I can't convince him that it would be an interesting opportunity for us to chat on the air.
One of the most perplexing stories that I think I've listened to you talk about are the MJ-12 papers. Can you share with our audience what they are and what is so bizarre about them?
Well, MJ-12 is allegedly the committee that was created by President Truman back in 1947 to oversee the research into the saucer collected at Roswell. The documents surfaced in 1985, and they were sent to Bill Moore on a undeveloped piece of 35 millimeter film. The MJ-12 document, the Truman letter, and I think that was the two documents that he got originally. And they alleged, gave the names of the people who were the first members of the MJ-12 committee, all conveniently dead when this document surfaced. But it caused a lot of interest in the news media and other arenas, because here are documents that suggest that there was a crash at Roswell and a second crash near Del Rio, Texas, some years later in December of 1950. As we looked at the documents, and I say we, and there's a lot of us who've studied the documents, we found all kinds of errors, problems with it, anachronisms that suggested it was a hoax. And in the interim, there's been, again, literally thousands of documents surfaced. People are making them up wholesale. And a lot of times they don't know enough about how the military works or that sort of thing so that you can pick it out. Mm-hmm. But the conclusion by most people now is that the whole MJ-12 thing is a hoax, and it was designed by people to propel them into the spotlight and validate the investigation at Roswell. And we actually have one of the guys who was involved in that admitting that he had been thinking about creating a Roswell document. Lo and behold, some months later, he's got one of those documents. So it's an elaborate hoax that I think diverted an awful lot of attention. Investigative work was done to it. The Fund for UFO Research used to actually provide grants to people to do areas of research, and they spent a great deal of their money on grants for people to do research into MJ-12, which pretty much all came up that it was a hoax. Only Stan Friedman of all of those people believed there was something to the documents. He worked on a book with Don Berliner, and Don Berliner actually got a supposedly field manual about how to deal with a downed UFO, again, anonymously on 35 millimeter film. Berliner believes it's a hoax. Friedman believed it was true. And what I'm looking at some of this sort of thing, a statement that sticks in my mind is many great hoaxes have some mechanism to prevent you from seeing the real document. And this is that, it's on 35 millimeter film. You cannot see the real document because you don't have them. You can't test the paper. You can't test the ink. You have to rely on what's on the paper and the words on the paper on the developed film. So the whole story, I think, is pretty much unraveled. And again, there's people who still swear that the documents are true and MJ-12 is true. No matter what evidence is presented to them, they'll insist that the Eisenhower document is true, and that's a briefing for President Eisenhower coming into this. And he wouldn't have needed that because the Roswell case happened in July of 1947. Eisenhower was the chief of staff of the Army. At the time, the Army was broken into two components, the Army Air Forces and the Army Ground Forces. And Eisenhower was the guy in charge of both of those units. And so had there been something at Roswell, it would have gone through him. So he already knew about it. It was unnecessary to brief him about it. And what it says in the MJ-12 documents, a number of things in those documents we now know are fake. So it just kind of is all collapsed.
1 week ago today, you had Stephen Bassett on your show. And he was pro what Grush had said at the congressional hearings. And I still have a lot of problems with everything Grush said. David Grush is a whistleblower, and he was one of the 3 witnesses at the congressional hearing a couple of months ago. Anything that Grush has told the members of Congress, as well as those of us who are watching it from our homes, was that anything that he said was hearsay evidence, that somebody else had told him about what he was relaying to the Congress. Why could he not just come out and say who that person was, Kevin? Because I know you, Tom, and Don did that with many of your witnesses.
I think the arena he's allegedly playing and kind of changes the dynamics of that. And the information was given to him on a confidential basis, and he doesn't want to burn his source, which is a very good excuse for not having to name your source. And he has said that he would talk about the sources in
a skiff.
Yes, yeah, secret meetings. He would give that out, and it felt comfortable doing it, but it wouldn't be something that would be given to the general public. There's no way we can vet anything he says. The only thing we know is he talked about a crash in Italy in 1933, that eventually the debris or the craft or whatever came into the hands of the Americans, which would be, I guess, on my side of the international border we're working with here. But a number of my colleagues in Italy investigated that claim 20 years ago. And since you've mentioned my blog, Wikipedia, you just go to it and type 1933 UFO crash into it, and you can read everything that they found in Italy that suggested that 1933 crash was a hoax. So that kind of undercuts some of what he said. The other case he mentioned was Roswell, but he didn't really say anything about it. He did eventually name, in the last week or so, a fellow, and the information is on my blog, one of the latest entries on my blog, and I cannot remember his name at the moment. Stratton, I think it was Stratton, a guy named Stratton, who had connections too and was aware of what was going on. So he has given us a name that we can verify the guy was in intelligence. But heck, I mean, you can verify I was working in intelligence as well. That doesn't really validate the claims of crashed flying saucers.
So, what did you take away from the congressional hearing? I thought it was a waste of time.
Absolutely. All we get was, well, we're setting up this program to do this, and we're going to be talking to these people, and we're going to be doing this, and we're getting our organization set up. Really, nothing about citing reports. Some of them are sprinkled in the hearings, but not very much. There was one held, was it last July? There were two guys from the Pentagon and a couple of congressional representatives quizzing them about some of this stuff. And one of the congressional representatives asked those two guys about the Malmstrom Air Force Base case where the flight of missiles was shut down. And both of them said, well, I don't know about that. I haven't heard about that. And I'm thinking, well, that's incredible. Here's a UFO sighting that actually did have national security implications.
Exactly.
You guys don't know about it, but this congressional representative does, as do I, and a lot of people who read UFO material. And later on, one of them said that he had really heard something about Malmstrom Air Force Base. And that kind of undercut his credibility because he denied knowing anything. And later on, he says, well, I know something about it. So it's kind of that. There's really nothing that's come out. The reports we see are the same kind of things we've seen for the last 50 years.
Right.
The information isn't very good. So we're just kind of stuck on that.
Kevin, as always, time goes by so fast with you, my friend, whether it's here in the X Zone or whether it's I'm behind the control panel at a different perspective. First of all, again, thank you for your service. Thank you for the great work that you, Don, and Tom have done over the years. And I look forward to next Wednesday when you and I will be working again on your show. And X Zone Nation, if anybody wants to watch or listen to A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle, it's available at xzbn.net. And to watch it, you can go to Rumble and watch it with our compliments. Kevin, take care, buddy. And to all you out there, we're going to be saying so long now. And until tomorrow night, always remember, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night now.